The Life of a Siberian Family on the Border with Mongolia, 19th-20th centuries. A collection of old postcards collected by my father in childhood is a unique opportunity to look into the past, including into the daily life of a family who lived on the Russian-Mongolian-Chinese border from the end of the 19th century until the Russian Revolution, and to remember the former greatness of these places. This is the garrison town of Troitskosavsk, where the Sobenikovs' father and grandfather were born and educated. Just 5 kilometers from Troitskosavsk lay the merchant settlement of Kyakhta and the Chinese trading town of Maimachen, with 2,000 Chinese male traders, were both on the very border with Mongolia, the northern province of China, until 1911. At that time, both Russian settlements had 10,000 inhabitants, Russians and Buryats. Many were related through marriages over several generations. Some of them left oral and written memories of their lives. The albums preserved their photographs, postcards, and correspondence. Chinese Maimachen, on the other hand, presented a different sight. Its narrow streets were lined with unassuming clay buildings, and the city was a hive of activity with Chinese people in their traditional long robes bustling about. And special design of Chinese roofs at the city's entrance added to its unique charm. An amateur family photo with an inscription on the back showed the square inside Maimachen with a crowd of Chinese who, according to the old custom, shaved their heads, leaving a tuft of hair braided in a long, thick braid at the back of their heads, or wore horsehair hairpieces that hung in long braids up to the floor. By the beginning of the 20th century, only 10 of the 120 Chinese firms that once briskly traded here remained in Maimachen. Payments were made through the Russian Asian Bank, whose branch was in Kyakhta, in Troitskosavsk, the so-called Russian Chinese Bank. It is what is left of him. But in the 19th century, the scene was quite different. Chinese merchants, with their distinct habits and practices, roamed the streets and courtyards of Russian merchants, offering their goods samples of Chinese teas. They were in Kyakhta from morning to evening, moving from house to house and entering all the interior rooms without asking. Their clothes emanated a strong smell of garlic and tobacco. In their hands, the Chinese always deftly rolled a pair of balls or Manchurian nuts from one palm to another, with their hands held behind their backs. From constant friction against each other, the nuts were polished and shone as if they had been smeared with oil. It was a type of massage. Russian merchants, particularly grandfather Sobenikov, borrowed the habit. The family transferred a pair of Manchurian nuts belonging to him to the Tyumen Museum complex with some other family heirlooms. The Manchurian walnut was traditionally considered the tree of heaven in China. It was revered and never cut down. It could often be found growing near temples and graves. Oral bidding between the Russians and the Chinese took place in broken Russian, which only they understood, and began with the words, "Nova tea has arrived, Plyeter. Look, Koloshenki tea." The Chinese praised his product. When someone did not understand them or did not want to talk to them, some of them got angry. "Du lax! I asked Tibi if she was the silver owner herself. I think you know the Russian words. Damn it." There was a time when they traded on credit on parole, both with the Chinese and the Mongols, and most of the trade was barter. However, the Chinese considered silver a commodity and valued it somewhat higher than gold. They used ingots in the same form as they came out of the smelter with a mark showing their weight. Such a coin was in my father's collection, along with ordinary Chinese round copper coins with a rectangular hole in the middle for stringing them on a thread. With the onset of autumn, life in the towns became livelier. Every day, convoys with goods arrived, stretching from Maimachen to Kyakhta and further to the customs yard at the end of Troitskosavsk. Kyakhta trading house firms made millions in turnover, attracting the Chinese and the Mongols. Both Russian border settlements played the role of intermediaries between East and West in the complete sense of the word. Russian trade in tea, cattle, and wool took place through them, and Russian and foreign travelers, embassies, and spiritual missions passed through this border. Tanneries using Mongolian raw materials were of particular importance. One of these factories was owned from 1888 to 1918. The family of the merchant of the first guild, Sobenikov, with his companions, the Molchanovs, his wife's brothers, stood on the very border near the village of Verkhny Dureny. The factory to which the Mongols sent their livestock employed 95 workers among the local population. The directorate of the Cossack Transbaikal Army notified the military governor of the Transbaikal region that work at the plant contributed to the improvement of material well-being and cultural development of the region. The collector, as postcard, introduces Buryat's primitive handicraft foundry and metalworking workshops set up right in yurts. It is now impossible to guess where the tannery of the past was located in the grassy field. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, the Sobennikov and Molchanov brothers trading house, since 1890, actively developed its activities in Mongolia. Here in the capital of northern Mongolia, the city of Urga, now Ulaanbaatar, there was a buyer of Mongolian raw materials for their plant. Since 1902, the trading house expanded its presence, opening trading posts throughout Mongolia, including a 500,000 rubles trading business 1,400 versts south of Kyakhta in the Mongolian Principality of Alishan at the foot of Tibet, where Tsogto Garmayev Badmajapov of Buryat origin carried out the exchange of livestock for Russian goods. Local veterinarians, including Mr. Labanov, provided veterinary care in the region. His photographs and postcards addressed to his father are still kept in family albums. One of the photographs shows the merchant society of Troitskosavsk, where the veterinarian Lobanov is sitting facing us. And in half a turn, the Kyakhta merchant of the First Guild and the former head of the city of Troitskosavsk, 1899 to 1903, Vasily Alexeyevich Sobennikov, 1861 to 1938, who wore a diamond ring on the little finger of his left hand, a symbol of prosperity and high status. To the mutual satisfaction of the merchants of both sides, Russia and China, trade, which was suspended for various reasons, was restored and marked with joint 2 coats of arms. The scarlet postcard in my father's collection is reminiscent of when the Russian double-headed eagle and the Chinese dragon coexisted. Throughout Mongolia, Russians and Buryats moved freely and daily. Russians hunted here, went fishing here, and of course, traded. Mr. Sobennikov, being a permanent member and chairman of the Troitskosavsky Kyakhtinsky branch of the Amur Department of the Imperial Russian Geographical Society, 1897 to 1901, took part in scientific trips and made reports. From these trips, there were photographs of holy places already abandoned and destroyed by time, now unknown to anyone. Only memories remain of Mongolia, which once ruled half the world from the period of Genghis Khan. They were peaceful and friendly people. However, the memory of the past is alive. A huge panel depicting the nation's hero, Genghis Khan, who created the largest empire in human history, greets the traveler immediately upon crossing the border. One of the collectible postcards depicts a Kyrgyz bride in a traditional wedding dress and a cone-shaped headdress on a horse. The headdress repeats that of Genghis Khan's wives and is typical for women of the Mongolian ethnic group. Their closest neighbors, the Buryats, excellent marksmen and horsemen, remind us of the days of conquest and the unsurpassed skill of the Mongol horsemen. In the 19th century, the border space between the countries was divided only by a pillar with a bilingual inscription, Chinese and Mongolian, Maimachen. Immediately behind it began the Urgino-Kyakhtinsky Tract, on both sides of which a deserted steppe stretched for many kilometers with rare yurts covered with white felt, decorated inside with carpets. On a tagan in each of them, mare's milk was boiled in a giant cauldron, from which kumis is prepared. Along the road here and there were snow-white suburban chapels over the graves of saints. The central city of Mongolia, Urga, as the Russians called it, was a trading center between China and Russia. In Mongolia, it was known as Bogdo-Kuren, the country's religious center, which occupied an essential place in the spiritual life of the Mongolian lamas after Lhasa in Tibet. It consisted of several monastic pagoda buildings with multi-tiered roofs decorated with gilding and carvings. There were many courtyards and living quarters for lamas who studied the highest religious dogmas from early childhood. In the center of the main temple, the shrine, stood an enormous gilded wooden statue of Buddha, assembled from 7 parts right on the spot. Around the main altar were statues of the principal deities, and in front of them were vessels filled with fruits or flowers, incense, burners, bells, a tambourine, a gong, and sacred texts. Rows of rotating drums with prayers and mantras created an atmosphere of mystery and constant prayer. Twilight always reigned in the temple and unquenchable lamps burned. Light penetrated only through a window cut into the dome. In the waves of incense smoke, as if barely noticeable, the easy flight of a cherub, the spirit of the divine was felt. Behind the main altar, throughout the temple, hundreds of sacred Buddha statues and Lamai cult objects were displayed on the shelves of cabinets. Outside the monastery gates, just like 100 years ago, there are endless rows of merchants offering goods of Mongolian everyday life. Hats, talismans, symbols, saint figurines, home altars, and incense burners. Previously, there was a Chinese Maimachen somewhere nearby, which was much larger than a settlement near the Russian border. Caravans with tea heading to Kyakhta passed through it. Usually the caravan consisted of 5-10 carts, each containing at most 5 bales packed in cowhide. Sometimes their number reached 200 carts. A postcard from the early 20th century depicts the palace of Gegen, the head of Mongolia, and the protege of China, Kutuktu Bogdo Gegen in Mongolian means the high priest of the Shigamuniva faith, a prophet who taught the people immortality and the transmigration of souls. Mongols believe that their whole lives are predetermined according to immutable laws, down to the smallest detail. Currently, the former palace is a museum in the city center. From a distance, you can see the central front gate sparkling with the bright green of curved, tiled roofs in several tiers. Behind the high walls are several winter and summer buildings in the same style, decorated with carvings, gilding, and paintings of historical scenes from ancient times. In the courtyard, a stone wall with a dragon sculpture symbolizes heavenly protection and imperial power. Mythological creatures of enormous size protect the inner gate. The palace's painted walls are decorated with rare paintings and ancient engravings. The rooms are full of valuable Buddha statues, expensive carved furniture, inlaid armchairs, vases of original shapes, objects made of bronze and silver, works of lacquer, embroidery, and much more. Here in the showcases are displayed items from the Bogdokan era, including household items, samples of expensive gold-embroidered clothing, and a Mongolian women's headdress in the form of horns, made of natural hair, which were decorated with silver, pearls, and corals. The canopied bed, yurt, and throne of Bogdo Khan, his palanquin stretcher and carriage, decorations for his beloved elephant, and children's miniature toys, yurt, ship. All this is the cultural heritage of a bygone era. Several old abandoned monasteries are close to the capital in the mountains that once represented Mongolian shrines. One of them is Buti Pinsum, located on a mountain surrounded by mountains. Inside the museum, items from the reign of the Bogdo Khans are scattered throughout the surrounding area. The monastery building is wooden and stands on a high stone pedestal. The main entrance is decorated with stucco and carvings and is painted in multicolored colors. According to Chinese tradition, there are stucco images on the roof of 2 deer and the wheel of samsara. In front of the temple lie stone statues of mythological creatures. The mountains surrounding the monastery are full of huge boulders of bizarre shapes. The remains of the second shrine are located in a valley surrounded by mountains. On the gently sloping rocky part of the mountain, you can see the ruins of the ancient monastic building of Manzushir. Stones with unclear inscriptions are scattered across the overgrown field of the valley. On some, there are old petroglyphs that are impossible to read. A spring with cold mountain water flows here. Many different stone babas, yurts, and a large cast-iron cauldron made by Chinese and Tibetan craftsmen can hold 250-300 buckets of water. Mongolia has many monasteries and datsans, temples, large and small. They are located away from the road in picturesque gorges between high mountains, densely covered with coniferous virgin forest. Like all ancient peoples on Earth, Mongols respect mountains and trees. This is the remnant of surviving shamanic beliefs, which believe that everything living and sentient has a soul at some level. Shamans are intermediaries between people and spirits, the subtle world. It is where the veneration of sacred trees known among many Siberian peoples came from. The trees are decorated with fabrics tied to tree trunks or with square pieces of material in red, yellow, white, and blue, with the words of prayers inscribed on them. All this flutters and sways into the wind, automatically performing prayers. In ancient times, in the northeastern part of Mongolia, in Karakorum, there was a rich palace of their ruler Ogadai, in the central hall of which stood the so-called shaman tree, symbolizing the world tree, the cosmic axis connecting the lower and upper worlds with the middle world of people.